On January 24th, 1961, a single safety switch prevented the detonation of an atomic bomb on American soil. If not for that one switch, the world would have been changed forever by the greatest nuclear disaster in history. Though it was the height of the Cold War, only a year before the Cuban Missile Crisis threatened to start World War III, the Soviet Union didn't drop an atomic bomb on America. The United States Air Force dropped not one, but two atomic bombs over the state of North Carolina when a B-52 bomber started falling apart in midair. How close the small community of Goldsboro, North Carolina came to nuclear annihilation would remain a state secret for over 50 years. The story of Cold War paranoia, a gas leak and a tragic midair explosion sounds like an airport thriller, but it's all true. And except for one small twist of fate, January 24th, 1961 could have triggered a nuclear apocalypse. Hey, I'm Andy Roberts, and today we're looking at the time the United States bombed itself. It's ironic that at the height of the Cold War, only 3 days after President John F. Kennedy began his term in office, it was the United States Air Force and not the Soviet Union that dropped an atomic bomb on American soil. For decades, as the two superpowers engaged in a nuclear standoff, the world waited for one of them to blink and strike first, triggering a world-ending exchange of nuclear firepower. A staggered convoy of B-52 bombers flying over North America acted as a nuclear deterrent. If the Soviet Union ever launched a single nuclear warhead at the United States, the bombers would break off and return fire on key Soviet targets. The intention was to threaten mutually assured destruction. After all, what was the point of striking your enemy if everyone ends up dead in the end? The B-52 that went down over North Carolina in 1961 was part of Coverall, the first phase of the armed nuclear deterrent strategy called Operation Chrome Dome. Over the years, the Strategic Air Command would fine-tune the deployment of B-52s to the point that they could ready a plane and have it airborne in 15 minutes. In November 1962, 1 month after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Operation Chrome Dome reached its peak, with 75 nuclear-armed B-52s airborne at one time. Historians are still debating the effectiveness of Cold War-era programs like Operation Chrome Dome, but as the 1961 Goldsboro crash proved, the military efforts ultimately caused more damage to America than they did to the Soviet Union. When a nuclear weapon is lost, it's called a broken arrow, and the most infamous broken arrow of all time lies under a rural farm in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and yes, it is still there to this day. It was supposed to be a routine flight, with a crew of 8 on board. The mission took a turn high above South Carolina when an airborne tanker's crew noticed that the B-52 had a fuel leak in its right wing. At the time, there was no immediate danger to the crew, who were advised to fly off the North Carolina coast and burn off fuel before performing an emergency landing at the Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in Goldsboro. This was standard operating procedure, as with less fuel on board, the plane weighed less and it became both safer and easier to land, in theory. The problem came when the B-52 started to expel fuel faster than expected as the leak worsened. Making it worse, the stress of flying was wreaking havoc on the plane's right wing, already weakened by the damage to the internal fuel tank. Over 10,000 feet in the air, the crew was following standard operating procedures for an emergency landing, unaware that the plane was starting to fall apart. In total, over 5,000 gallons of fuel were lost in 3 minutes, forcing the drastic landing attempt at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base. Uneven and leaking fuel, the B-52 was impossible to control as it started the descent. The pilot, Major Walter S. Tulloch, was a decorated war hero, having flown missions over Japan during World War II. But he lost control of the plane as it dropped below 10,000 feet, forcing him to make the hard decision to order the crew to evacuate. 5 of the servicemen on board, including Major Tulloch, were able to safely land, while 3, Major Eugene Shelton, Major Eugene Richards, and Technical Sergeant Francis Barnish, tragically lost their lives during the evacuation by following standard procedure. But this was not a standard emergency. One of the surviving servicemen, Adam Mattox, was a co-pilot on board the B-52. In an interview he gave 62 years later to a local news station, Mattox explains the danger of getting out of the plane. Without an ejection seat, he had the choice to follow the navigators down through the bottom of the plane, or instead, do something no one in history had done before. Go out the top of a B-52 without an ejection seat. Mattox made his choice to go through the top hatch in the cockpit. The only pilot in history to do so without using an ejection seat, to get above the exploding plane where he was able to parachute to safety. Of the 3 who died, 2 were unable to exit the plane, and another jumped to get clear but didn't survive the landing. Soon after abandoning the plane, the B-52 exploded during its sudden descent, roughly 8,000 feet above North Carolina, spreading its wreckage for miles across sparsely populated farmland. The 2 Mark 39 atomic bombs on board were thrown clear of the bomb bay and sent hurtling towards the ground. To make the situation worse, one of the bombs was beginning to arm itself. The Mark 39 bombs weighed slightly over 3 tons each, 11 feet in length and just over 2 feet wide. But it was the payload that made them so dangerous. Each bomb was capable of an explosion measuring 4 megatons, over 400 times more powerful than the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. One bomb deployed its parachute and safely, at least as safely as a thermonuclear bomb can, fell to Earth, landing in a tree that prevented it from hitting the ground. The second bomb never deployed its parachute. It was a miracle that bomb did not explode upon impact and instead landed with enough force that it plunged an estimated 185 feet into the Earth. The Mark 39 broke apart during its uncontrolled descent, with the primary explosive system armed and intact, but the secondary system was nowhere to be found. Without that, the bomb was useless. So, atomic bombs utilize the process of nuclear fission, splitting an atom to release an explosive amount of energy and heat in the span of picoseconds. The process relies on a series of explosions. First, the outer shell of the bomb explodes, compressing the inner core of nuclear material. Then, the nuclear chain reaction begins in the core, unleashing the raw power of the atom. The explosive outer ring of the Mark 39 atomic bomb went off when it hit the ground. But without the final safety switch being flipped, it wasn't able to complete the process to activate the inner core. That raised the question, what stopped the bomb from exploding in the air, which it was designed to do? Well, Mark 39 atomic bombs were designed to trigger after a certain amount of time in freefall, roughly 42 seconds. The B-52 fell apart at a height of 10,000 feet, giving plenty of time for the bomb to arm, except the bombs were stupid weapons, designed to do one thing: explode. Without the smart technology of modern bombs, the Mark 39 was unable to adjust to the rapidly escalating situation. The second Mark 39 had fallen out of the plane while still attached to its storage rack. That might not sound like much, but it was enough to confuse the bomb's rudimentary internal system. It wasn't until the bomb fell free from the rack that it started to arm itself, and by then it was only 15 seconds from impact. Even with that buffer, the bomb could have completed the process upon impact, if not for the single arming switch that required manual control that remained in the safe position. Within hours of the bomb's landing in North Carolina, the United States military was on the scene, collecting the intact atomic bomb and establishing a quarantine zone around the second bomb. Air Force engineers tried to retrieve the bomb, but eventually gave up, with no safe way to pull it out of the ground. The uranium core inside the bomb weighed tons, causing it to sink into the wet, marshy field faster than the engineers could pull it back out. The excessive groundwater beneath the field made it hard to even locate the buried bomb. Engineers used radar to try and find it, but it kept moving through the saturated soil. As they dug down to try and retrieve the heavy core, the groundwater would just rush in and fill in the hole, making retrieval impossible. To this day, it's believed that the unrecovered uranium core remains under that field. Though the uranium core remains lost and 3 of the American soldiers on board the B-52 lost their lives that day, tens of thousands would have been killed if not for that one single safety switch. Though the military tried, it was impossible to keep the news of the Goldsboro crash out of the news. Within hours of the crash, articles reporting on the accident stated that there was no danger to any civilians and that the bombs were unarmed. It wasn't until 2011, when a Freedom of Information Act request was filed, that it became known how close we came to a nuclear tragedy. The story to the public was that there was no danger, but behind closed doors at the highest levels of government, the discussion was very, very different. Declassified documents reveal that in 1963, Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, revealed there was a high chance of an accidental nuclear detonation, citing the 1961 Goldsboro crash as an example of near catastrophe. McNamara explained to the Joint Chiefs of Staff the looming threat of the nuclear accident, stating that we are spending millions of dollars to reduce this problem to a minimum, but we could not assure ourselves completely against such a contingency. Going on, McNamara accurately said that it was unlikely the Soviets were spending as much as we were in attempting to limit the possibilities of an accidental launch. Whether that fear had any basis in reality or not remains a hotly debated topic among scholars. But in 2018, nuclear weapons analyst Stephen Schwartz explained in an interview why the Goldsboro crash occurred. We had convinced ourselves that the Soviet Union was going to attack us at any moment, so we increased our operational readiness, and we sacrificed the safety not only of the general public, but the people working with these nuclear weapons. Despite some close calls, an accidental launch and nuclear war have never happened, but Goldsboro has been forever changed. Buried beneath the field for over 60 years, the uranium core of the Mark 39 bomb has been left undisturbed by the United States. The United States government bought the land above it, making it illegal to dig deeper than 5 feet or to build anything more than farm fencing. Accordingly, there has been no reported environmental damage from the uranium core. To the town of Goldsboro, the existence of the bomb is an open secret. There's even a historical marker in the town of Eureka, North Carolina. The marker says, "Widespread disaster averted." The location of where the second Mark 39 landed before sinking beneath the ground is purposely unmarked. An eyewitness to the crash explained in a 2013 interview that you can tell where the bomb went down as the ground is softer, but it's otherwise unremarkable from the land around it. We were lucky on January 24th, 1961, but humanity can only dodge so many bullets, and someday our number will come up. What makes it worse is that we'll be the ones responsible for our own destruction.